And those things were all about genre. You know, Dungeons and Dragons was Tolkien fantasy, Traveller was sort of Larry Niven-esque science fiction, RuneQuest was maybe a Fritz Librarian kind of fantasy. And we all in that group, we dove into each of these things happily. And then one day, Stephen Dobson, who was widely regarded as the best dungeon master in Richmond Hill in those times, he brought this book home. He brought this game home. It's called Bandit. And it was using the same rules that RuneQuest did, but unlike RuneQuest, it was set in a very specific period, in the late 1920s, when Prohibition reigned and gangsters were crazy, when really good detective stories might be set. And it was a game about that. So, once again, I missed out on the actual reveal of this, but all my other friends got it. And so they did this scenario where they played a bunch of low-level gangsters who were sent to this house where they were going to be waiting a shipment of booze, and they were supposed to just get that back into Chicago. So they hole up in this old farmhouse, and it's kind of funny. There's some things that are strange with it. They think somebody else might be in there. So as they go exploring around, one thing leads to another, and before long they're being chased by giant man-sized rats with sort of human faces. And they lost it. They had this moment of actual proper terror, and I was sort of quietly told this by my dear friend Bruce Girdler for the next time I played Bandit. And I did play Bandit on a one-on-one scenario, and Steph thought he had me. We did this private detective thing where I would have to infiltrate this peculiar men's club in Boston, and I knew what was going on, but I didn't want him to know because he was having a good time. But you know what? I could not fake that shit. I could not fake the idea that this was going on, although I did everything I could. It was almost there. But it comes to maybe what we need is a kind of complicity. I kind of wonder if it's even remotely possible to bandit the horror genre. Because the fact is, by its nature, it's an inherently unstable genre. Our expectations are stabilized, and so it becomes unstable. Funny old paradox. You'd like to figure out a way to recapture that. I'd like to figure out a way to tell readers that, hey, here's a book, and it's going to have some stuff happening, and it's going to be kind of fun, and anything could happen here. And be able to draw that reader into a dark place in a natural way. Realities of the publishing marketplace make that just about impossible. Even if we were to take horror fiction out of its section of the bookstore, and even if we were to make covers and titles that turn the narrative generic, we would never be able to inoculate readers against the understanding of just what they were getting into. Like The Passage, Justin Cronin's vampire novel, set a little bit in the future. The cover, you could be fooled by that cover. You could think that, oh, it's just a light in the forest. The Passage, perhaps it's some young man finding a way to become a man, or perhaps there's an actual passage and there's some narrative to get through the passageway. Of course, you just had to turn on the TV and watch that Good Morning America or whatever it is show where Cronin goes on and Stephen King comes on the voiceover and says, son, you're the heir apparent to all of this. I can't believe how wonderful a horror novel about vampires in the future this is. Thank you, Mr. King. Thank you. Great. Really, readers need to know what they're getting. That's the problem. The fact is that it's a science fiction horror novel pitched quietly at first won't find any readership. And also, it will really piss off readers who thought that they were in for a nice long story about a young man's rite of passage in 19th century Ontario. You can still go there, though. Just to plug the ChiZine publications people, our gracious host. They make a point of putting designs and marketing these books in a way that the sort of pure horror marketing doesn't do. They do interesting covers that seem like it might be literary, it might be a proper horror, and it draws attention away from the genre. That's a lot of that is Eric Moore's fine work. These things are designed to evoke the book inside and not the genre, for the most part. Just a second here. And this is my collection, Monstrous Affections. It was blessed with a really horrifying cover, but it does identify itself as horror, but it's kind of horrifying the way a morgue photograph would be horrifying. I think it may actually be the scariest story in the collection, because it does manage to creep up on you. It has frightened children. There are adults who won't keep the thing face up on their coffee table. It is a picture, for those of you who haven't seen it, of an evenly lit, stout man wearing what looks like an inexpensive suit. It has been said by a Globe and Mail writer to represent City Councillor and future Mayor Rob Ford. Except that as you look more closely, you see the mouth is a wide slit, ear to ear almost, and the eyes are shut. You can't see from here, but they're not quite shut. If you look very closely in the big picture, you can see clear blue eyes peering out. They may have been stapled somewhat shut, but they're not quite there. It gives away the game. It gives away the game. This sort of Mutter Museum reject guy that's here, but it's so damn good, and it's really such a sublime work of stealth terror that who really cares? And Eric can do this in a visual medium very well, because the book sits on a shelf or a coffee table, or it's clutched in the hands of people, and it simply presents itself. You don't know what you're getting when you turn over this white cover and look at the front. It just gets you. As a writer, it's just impossible to compete with that. You can write. You can't turn your horror stories about giant cyclopses and terrible root cellars and vampires and silver mines into Bandit. That only works once. There's another model though, the barrel works method. Try this. Go back to Stephen King, who first juiced the genre into sort of its hyperactive flame-out phase. For all of King's limits, he's got some serious limits as a writer, but he's always struck me as a master of emotional realism. You pick it up for the monsters, but ultimately what draws you in is the characters, their experience living in America with families, with friends, their own prosaic pasts. They make breakfast, they fix their cars, they talk with their bosses or their publishers and agents. King does right when he knows. The real world takes on this seductive scent. You can get homesick reading some of King's stories. And after a while, and quite a while, it doesn't write that short, you start to think, I could read this story about breakfast and kids and fixing your car for a long time, because these people are the kind of people I like, the kind of people I know. And when the demands of pacing and story and so on require that the monster shows up, it's like the beginning of that dark ride. If the writer's done his job, you should be closing your eyes as everything plunges into the place where the skeletons reach out and the barrels fall on your head and the dead walk again. You can't really look, but ultimately you've got to look. And kind of a statement of the obvious, really. Any story needs to draw you in with deepened characters and emotional realism. But it's actually not so. A lot of hard science fiction definitely benefits from those elements, but they're not really as essential. Readers go there for other things. They go for the ideas, for the sense of wonder. Other genres pay heed to emotional lives of their characters, but it can go by the wayside and the stories can still work. Not so with horror. And part of that may just be the notion that horror is actually, as Winter says, an emotion, can only be arrived at after a route of carefully wrought emotional narratives. It may be that this actually springs from reality itself as much as the fantastic. And the trouble keeping the genre stable is that the stories really have to evoke an emotion that most people want day to day in their lives. So the stuff that's been catching on in this genre, the stuff that's really done well, has been things that evoke other emotions entirely. We take the tropes of horror. We have vampires and they're about chaste romance. We have, or they're simply discussing other things. They're metaphors. Christ. The zombies are ways to make fun of Regency romances that we had to read in high school. Not Regency romances. I shouldn't say that about her. The stuff doesn't really disturb us. It's fun. It doesn't draw us deep into the terrifying. It doesn't do what horror should fundamentally do. It's not horror that Doug Winter would approve of, and yet that's where the genre is most successful with people. So I think one more one more bit here. Because I'm thinking about that maybe what we need to do is really scare the living crap out of people. But I'll tell one more story. This is actually, I'm all grown up in this one. It was in 2002 when I was sleeping in my bed in the house where we live in the East End. I was woken up by a noise. House is very old, it's got bad floors. It's impossible to walk quietly on those floors. So I heard this noise. Checked to see if my partner was in the bed beside me. She was. So I got up and went into the hallway. There I was confronted by this whip-thin young man. He was carrying my leather coat, a laptop bag, Karen's coat, various other things we had, including a 10-inch Henkel kitchen knife. We looked at each other, and he raised the knife and ordered me onto my knees. I remember feeling really cold and calm when this was happening, and I did as I was told. But I stepped back into the bedroom, and as he turned away for a second, I slammed the door, and I braced myself against it. He was enraged, tried to get in. There was a pounding and a pushing and a really sharp sound that I didn't know what that was at the time. I told Karen to not call 911, and after a moment, that's what she did. He didn't have the sense to take the phone off the hook downstairs, which was one of the moments of luck there. He came back up. He pushed against the door some more. Karen held the phone up to me so I could talk to the 911 operator. I described him again, got some mild heck from her. Apparently I hadn't mentioned the knife the first time. I hadn't wanted to upset Karen. Police were on their way. They actually didn't take very long. It felt like they took about a day. The guy came and tried the door again. He may have said something. I can't quite remember. I was in this adrenal lock at that point. He couldn't get in though. I'm big, and I was braced against with my feet against the bed and my shoulder against the door. He would have had to bring more strength than he had. But the police did arrive. They came en masse. Anyone who tells you that there aren't enough police on duty in Toronto at night to chase down a knife-wielding home invasion maniac at 5 in the morning are lying. There was pretty much the whole force there as far as I could tell. The 911 operator asked me if it was okay to break in our front door, and I said, sure. Didn't have to, though. They got in the back where he'd gotten in. And I was finally able to open the door when one of them, this giant guy in body armor with a Glock drawn, showed up in at the other end of the hallway. I am not religious, but I thank God in a terrified, broken voice. While they searched for the culprit, I wandered through the house. I looked around myself to see. They finally stopped me when I stepped outside. I literally wasn't thinking. I went outside while they were searching for this guy because that terror was too raw. They finally caught him. He dropped the knife. He was wearing Karen's coat and carrying her cell phone, so in the end he spent 2 years in prison without even a trial. We never learned his name. Seemed to learn something like that. Took 2 days off work, one for the whiskey. You really want whiskey after this kind of thing, believe me. The other thing was to do everything I could to batten down the hatches, made sure that wouldn't happen again. At that point I realized this is actually horror. This is actually the thing that we're aiming at. And it's not playing with a narrative, it's not me cutely wishing I'd seen the Stepford Wives with that kind of innocence. It's not a dark ride. It seems titillating in the telling. I tried to tell that with some narrative things, but I'll tell you, when you get right down to it, by itself, in the world, horror sucks. Thanks very much.